think a 7-2-2 formulation. So that meant that when you're using pure biosolids, you're getting 7% nitrogen. When you're cutting it down, you know, 60 or actually 80% with wood shavings, you're not going to build it from 7 to 15. If anything, you're going to cut it down to where at most 1.5, maybe 0.15.
Does it have wood shavings in it?
Oh yeah.
The soil and rock, what you would buy there would have wood shavings in it?
Probably so.
Oh.
So, in other words, I would never let a compost application substitute for fertilizer, no matter what kind of fertilizer you're putting, or what kind of compost you're putting out.
Thank you.
I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But the other thing about putting out fertilizers is when you're first starting out with an organic program, your soil is probably pretty depleted of nutrient material and of biological life. And you ought to fertilize fairly often, 2-3 times a year. Once you really get the organic content of your soil built up, you're not going to have to fertilize nearly as often. In fact, Dr. Elaine Ingham, who is, she's a PhD microbiologist with the University of Oregon for many years. Now she has her own company called the Soil Food Web and is sort of the princess of compost tea, so to speak, but that's a whole nother subject. But she made the comment at a lecture that I once went to, saying if you had adequate microbial life in the soil, and if you were recycling, so to speak, if you were putting your lawn clippings, your leaves, things like that, if you were allowing them to return to the soil, she said that one application of nitrogen fertilizer should last you 100 years. I hope that's not true, because I like selling fertilizer. No, that's not the case. But when you first start out, you probably will need to feed 2, 3, 4 times a year. Once you've been on an organic program for a while, if you forgot to fertilize for a whole year, you probably still have the nicest yard in the block. It's just as you build microbial life in the soil, as you are recycling these nutrients over and over, you're just not going to have to feed as often. Now, if you're a coastal grower that's growing hay and you're hauling that hay off premises, yeah, you're going to have to feed more often because you're taking those nutrients away. If your neighbor has not learned that you don't rake leaves and put them in a bag on the curb and send them away, well, yeah, that neighbor's going to have to fertilize more often too. But when you stop and think about it, it's just, nature is so well designed. You've got these big trees with these roots that go way down into the soil that are sucking up all these minerals and all these wonderful things from deep down in the soil, taking them up and putting them in the leaves. Then at whatever's the appropriate time of year, fall or spring, depending on the tree, all of those leaves fall back down on top of the ground. That's how nature takes those nutrients from 10 or 15 feet down in the ground and puts them up on top of the ground. Put them in the leaves, let the leaves fall down. So what do? We rake them up, we haul them away, or whatever else. Don't do that. With your leaves, just shred them up and let them go back into the grass. There's actually a lot of nutrient material in there. My friend Don Pylant used to be with San Antonio Botanical Gardens. Called me one day on the air and said, "Please thank all my neighbors for being stupid enough to put all their leaves out on the curb." So because in the fall, every Saturday morning, I drive around the neighborhood and get 100 bags of leaves. And Don lives on about an acre of land. He started out with some of the worst ground I've ever seen. Boy, he put leaves out 4 inches deep and run his mower through them and chop them up, go back and put more on, chop. In less than a year's time, he had some of the most fertile ground you have ever, just bringing in all that wonderful material that other people were throwing away. Anyway, organic fertilizer, use it regularly to begin with, and then you can start tapering off, with how much of it you will have to apply.
Question.
Yes?
I had a neighbor too.
Everybody seems to.
Yeah. Sorry. And he was bagging up things and throwing them away. There's one problem, as you mentioned, that your friend had 4 inches and he came by and shredded it and tore it up. What you're saying is that the way to break it down is that you have a flower bed and a beautiful tree fell down, leaves fell down in the flower bed, and took his blower and blew it out in the yard, out in the yard. And then he ran over it back and forth to his lawnmower. That's what you're looking for.
Well, cutting that material down into small pieces makes it decompose faster. Obviously, if it's falling down in among your ground cover and things like that, that's not a practical way to do it. We can still make things decompose. We can speed up the decomposition by doing several things. We can add the things that decompose leaves and grass clippings and organic material are stimulated by sugary compounds. You want to make leaves break down faster, spray a little molasses on there. Spray a little bit of sugar on there. When Malcolm was starting his big compost operation, the Coca-Cola bottling plant was paying Saws thousands of dollars for the right to dump their out-of-date Coca-Cola down the storm drain, down the sewer system, so to speak. Malcolm went to them and said, hey, not only will I not charge you to come spray that stuff onto my compost pile, he said, I might even pay you $5 a truckload or something like that. They started spraying that. His compost got hotter than it ever had. It decomposed. It broke down more quickly than it ever has. We'll get Malcolm to come tell you the story sometime. He checked the temperature inside his compost pile, and it was so high, to make a point, one Thanksgiving, he took a turkey, wrapped it several layers thick in aluminum foil and, brown paper or whatever else, buried it in his compost pile, and had it for dinner the next day. Fully cooked. It worked so well he did a pig the next year. Anyway, you can speed up the decomposition of leaves with things like molasses, that stuff, or your Medina Plus. I don't know if we've got any of it out here, wherever it is. Yeah, Medina Plus. This is microbial stimulant, so even where you can't shred your leaves up, you can, still make them break down quickly enough. Or your neighbor can, I'm sorry.
I have one stupid question and then a good question.
Okay.
The stupid one is superphosphate is not the thing to use to break down your...
Absolutely not.
Because it's
Absolutely not.
chemical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, also, phosphate doesn't stimulate the microorganisms to break anything down. And most phosphate is totally wasted in our soils here. Come to the vegetable garden seminar in a couple of weeks. I'll tell you about what it's useful for and how to use it. But your other question, not your spark question, your other
My
question.
good question is, how do you fertilize your big trees? It's easy enough to figure out how to do your grass or things on the ground, but how do you get to your huge live oaks and Spanish oaks?
You just put a little extra fertilizer on top of the ground.
Close to the trunk or out as far as
The
root
feeding
line?
roots of the tree are pretty much out under the spread of the branches. And again, I just go around the tree an extra time or two with fertilizer spreader and don't worry about it. That's all you need. All you need. Yes, ma'am.
Should you leave the leaves in the beds, the flower beds with the shrubs, or blow them out and...
That's up to you. The only problem that I ever see with leaving leaves in a bed is they just mat up one on top of the other, and they get to where you can almost waterproof the soil underneath it. If that's the case, get in there and rake them out or blow them out or whatever else, or put something on that makes them break down more quickly. Yes, sir.
You can't get too thick with the leaves, mulch them up like from Arizona ash tree, or is there any trees that you want to stay away from as far as leaves?
No. And this whole business about pecan leaves being toxic and things, simply not true. I don't believe you could ever have too much leaves from your own tree. I think if you went out and collected every bag of leaves in the neighborhood, you might get too many. But don't ever worry about them being too deep on the ground underneath the tree. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, we just installed this zoysia
Uh-huh.
box in
Yeah.
our yard. So I don't know if we have to, you would recommend to put the sprinkler system. Would it need a lot of water? Or
When you first plant it, zoysia needs lots of water. And to keep it looking nice, it needs as much water as Bermuda or St. Augustine. If you don't water it, it doesn't die. It just turns brown, as long as it gets water occasionally. But if you want a pretty green yard, you're going to have to water regularly. Now, whether you do that with a sprinkler system or a sprinkler on the end of the hose or whatever, that's up to you. But yes, you'll need to water regularly. We'll talk about watering in just a second. Yes, sir.
I've got basically